As a kid, did you ever have that cool friend of an older sibling of a friend? They're almost mythical because you see them once and only once when they show up to your neighborhood on a summer night with this huge missile that you're probably not supposed to have as a common citizen. After too much debate over when, whether, and how to set it off, the moment finally arrives. They set it up in the middle of the street, light it, and backpedal to the sidewalk. You all watch it as it starts to crackle and smoke, and then it kind of starts hissing, ready to blow at any moment. And half a minute passes, and it just doesn't. And then everyone starts arguing over who did what wrong, who ripped off who, and you turn to your friend to say, I told you it was bullshit, but in some fragment of time between told and you, it happens. And all of a sudden, everybody's running for cover, 3 or 4 car alarms are going off, and your neighbor's lawn is on fire. That is the story of the 1990s Minnesota Vikings.
Herschel Walker lives in dreamland. Despite the extensive sample in his recent past of pitiful production, it simply hasn't registered to him. He's going for the Delusion of Grandeur world title, but Viking fans are smarter than that, and they're worried that Walker's level of play won't come close to justifying the treasure chest of draft picks shipped to North Texas. For good reason. To do so, he needs to be a superstar in 1990. Instead, he's something resembling an average starting back at best. On a Monday night in Philly with the entire country watching, he finishes with 3 rushing yards and nearly as many lost fumbles. And only luck prevents perfect balance there when he's somehow ruled down on the most obvious fumble you'll ever see with a clear recovery by Philly's Mike Golick. Strong contender for worst game by a running back in the history of organized football. In the middle of the season, even Mike Lynn, while trying to say it wasn't a bad trade, literally in the next breath defines it in the exact manner Webster would define a bad trade. And that's the man who made the trade. The man tied for the least likely person to ever make such a remark. The person he's tied with? That would be Walker's own agent, Peter Johnson, who does not agree with Lynn. He goes further. An agent says a team trading for his own client was the worst move in NFL history. Again, all in the middle of his first full season since the deal. So given the bounty surrendered to acquire him, he's become a national punching bag, and he drags his squad down with him. In their 22nd season with Jerry Burns either running the offense or running the team, the Vikings lose 10 games for the very first time. 1991, the Vikings reward all this by doubling down and re-signing Walker over the summer to a new lucrative contract where he maintains his perch atop the team's payroll. He then promptly leaves for New York, opting to try and qualify for the U.S. Olympic bobsled team instead of attending Viking practices. Subsequently arriving a week late to camp doesn't exactly ingratiate him to his teammates, especially after the team has bent over backwards to accommodate him and even his quarterback calls him out. Herschel's quite fond of saying he wants to let his play on the field do the talking, and now in year 3 of the all-in Walker experience, it's year 3 of his play on the field doing all the talking of Charlie Chaplin. He has firmly entrenched himself in the land of mediocrity, as has his team in another season on the outside looking in come playoff time. After the 91 season, the Vikings finally cut Herschel Walker, severing ties once and for all. Even if he'd played at an all-pro level, this would have been highway robbery by Jimmy Johnson. But he wasn't even good. He was no better than run-of-the-mill. Mike Lynn had insisted upon making the deal that it would be an utter failure if Walker didn't lead the Vikes to a Super Bowl win. He didn't even lead them to a playoff win. Peter Johnson was 100% correct.
Congratulations to the New York Giants, winners of Super Bowl 25, and Washington, winners of Super Bowl 26. New York has now won 2 and Washington 3. The Cowboys won the Herschel Walker trade of 1989. Let's see by how much. The Fort Worth Star-Telegram clearly decided it was time for a victory lap on behalf of their local team. They traced out the entire fallout of this thing, who every draft pick was used on, which picks were horse traded for further picks, etc. What they found was that the Walker trade ultimately impacted more than half the teams in the NFL in some way. Here we'll punch up every player according to their eventual approximate value, the StatHead metric we visited earlier, to help broadly compare the value of different players in different positions. First, Walker himself, who contributed an AV of 22 during his 2.5 years in Minnesota. Fairly run-of-the-mill, and certainly not what the Vikings were hoping for, but it's not nothing. Now these are the players Dallas got in return, most notably Ike Holt, who worked out great as a corner and special teams hero. These guys combined for an AV of 24, so before we even get to the draft picks the Vikings gave up, this deal was a wash at best. Now the Vikings did end up landing a few picks from this trade, and they did use one of them on wide receiver Jake Reed, who will be fantastic for him throughout the decade. His total AV in Minnesota is 57, nearly triple that of the guy who they were after in the first place. So, who did Dallas acquire with their truckload of draft picks? Pro Bowl defensive tackle Russell Maryland, corner Kevin Smith. Both important contributors to the Dallas teams in the 90s. And then there's Darren Woodson, who, by the end of his incredible 12-year career with the Cowboys, will sit on an approximate value of exactly 100. Throw in Dan Stubbs, who had a great year in Dallas, and, well, this really just speaks to Cowboys coach Jimmy Johnson's ability to wheel and deal with the picks he landed, not just what the Vikings gave him. It's not at all as though the Vikings would have necessarily drafted any of these guys with those picks, but after everything's settled, man, did the Cowboys win this trade. I feel like we forgot somebody. Did we forget somebody? Hold on, let me look. No. Oh, no, no! Emmitt Smith. Career approximate value for the Cowboys, 162. Won the Rookie of the Year award, soon won the League MVP award, 8-time Pro Bowler, will break the all-time NFL record for career rushing yardage, thereby at least making a claim to the title of greatest running back of all time. The precise definition of the game-changing stud back the Vikings were looking for in the first place when they gave away their future. As soon as the deal was done, Jimmy Johnson celebrated it as the Great Train Robbery. It took the rest of us years to understand exactly what he pulled off here. He knew immediately. But as you might have already concluded by now, football is very weird. It's true that the Vikings dealt away their chances at drafting a future Hall of Famer, but within this span of time, despite losing all they did, they still somehow managed to bring on 3 future Hall of Famers who will help to define the next decade of Vikings football. The first one, and the only one they had to spend all that much capital to acquire, is Randall McDaniel. McDaniel is going to retire as one of the greatest left guards ever, and will make a long career out of sitting defensive linemen right on their asses. Remember when we took a look at the top 50 player team tenures of all time, with the Vikings claiming 6 of those 50? McDaniel is number 6. The Vikings drafted him out of Arizona State, where injuries on the roster compelled him to switch from tight end to guard. Problem: he was about 40 pounds underweight for that position. Solution: start powerlifting and eat everything in the entire world. I'm not sure whether you can live a more blessed life in this existence than that of a 23-year-old offensive lineman who just got drafted in the first round and handed an enormous contract. Not only are you allowed to eat 100 chicken wings in one sitting and begin every Monday morning by ripping open a bag of potato chips and dumping in a jar of queso, you are supposed to. What I wouldn't give. This is the life of my dreams. Chris Carter grew up outside Cincinnati, where he saw his fellow wide receiver, Chris Collinsworth, rack up several Pro Bowl seasons for the Bengals. Carter became such a fan that he decided to drop the H from his name as well. The best way to stand out as a playmaker in the crowded college football landscape is not by racking up huge numbers, but by making one single play so astonishing that everyone in America is going to see it. And that is what Ohio State's Chris Carter did in the 1985 Citrus Bowl. His quarterback, Jim Carsados, is facing pressure and looking to cut bait. He intends to throw it out of bounds, but in the general vicinity of one of his receivers so he doesn't get flagged for intentional grounding. Carter does not get the memo. He levitates into the air, casts out his left arm like a fishing line, and hauls in a whopper. And here again is that future we've been seeing lately. Carter keeps his toes in bounds while completing the catch, demonstrating astonishing footwork that won't become commonplace until decades later. This play is immortalized in Buckeye lore, but Carter didn't get to finish out his career there. He'd grown up with very little money, and when an agent dangled a $5,000 loan in front of him, he took it. $5,000 may as well have been $5 million. The NCAA, being the they are, ruled him ineligible for his senior season upon learning this. This also rendered Carter ineligible for the standard NFL draft. He was now cast into the wilds of the supplemental draft, which the NFL holds on an irregular basis. It was only ever a big deal in 1984 when teams selected players already drafted by the USFL, guys like Steve Young, in case it collapsed. That year aside, it's really just an afterthought of an exercise in which teams draft the rights to players who didn't finish college for one reason or another. But it should not be an afterthought. A lot of these guys turned out to be good as hell, and the greatest supplemental draftee of all time, by miles, is Cris Carter, who was drafted by the Eagles and unceremoniously waived a couple years later because he'd been getting into drug trouble. Carter credits Buddy Ryan, the coach who cut him, for motivating him to turn his life around. The Vikings happily paid the $100 waiver fee to pick him up, and in return, Carter gave them the vast majority of his 131 career touchdowns. This is a total that, entering the 2023 season, still ranks as the 8th most that any player at any position has ever scored. By the way, not one, but 2 other players in this all-time top 10 are future Vikings you haven't even gotten to meet yet. We got some real fun times ahead.
That fun is not just limited to the offensive side of the ball. Remember how back in the 70s, the Vikings had an undersized defensive tackle who laid waste to the NFL's interior offensive linemen? Well, now in the 90s, history is repeating itself. John Randle grew up in poverty in a Texas farming town with about as many people as there are football players on the sidelines of a game. In high school, after football practice, he needs to hitch a ride home, sometimes not arriving till 10 at night. This daily ordeal nearly makes him give the sport up, but he knows football can provide a path to a better life and works non-stop to make it happen. That path takes him from community college to Division II Texas A&I, and despite dominant play in 2 years there, he goes undrafted in 1990 with his weight of a little over 240 pounds, proving a roadblock to his NFL dreams. He's brought in for a workout by Tampa, where his brother plays, but it doesn't work out when he balks at the idea of switching to linebacker. It doesn't work out in Atlanta for the same reason. Then when Minnesota takes a look at him, it doesn't work out because they require his weight to be 250 to be given a chance on what is already the league's smallest defensive front. Hope of making it in pro football is beginning to fade, and he's fully prepared to begin a career as a garbage man. Then one day, after about a month of trying in vain to add any weight whatsoever, a 244-pound Randle steps on a scale with a 7-pound padlock chain tied around his waist, and John Randle instead becomes a Minnesota Viking. To stay a Minnesota Viking, he has to maintain his relentless work ethic. Rosie, his wife, usually bears the brunt of these efforts, the stand-in against whom Randle works on his pass rush arsenal, to the point that she's ashamed to take him out in public. This lack of an off switch isn't just confined to his waking hours, and he nearly drives her to a different bed. Meanwhile, his waist has graduated from padlocks to logs, while pine trees at a local park have graduated into practice dummies. Randle eventually bulks up to 275 and is such a menace even in practice that the Battle of Randles helps elevate McDaniel's level of play, who will later openly acknowledge his entry into the Hall of Fame was aided by all those years facing John in practice. While 275 is still undersized by NFL defensive tackle standards, it does not matter. For a decade, he serves as the heart and soul of the team, never missing a game, lining up with his trademark Batman face paint as the undisputed heavyweight trash talk champion of the world, week after week after week. And for good reason, he backs it up as a completely unblockable force of nature. Sacks are much harder to come by from the interior, and nearly all of the NFL's top pass rushers almost always operate on the edge. Nevertheless, from the year Randle breaks into the starting lineup in 1991 until his tenure in Minnesota wraps up after 2000, Randle leads the league in sacks by a comfortable margin despite spending most of that time inside as their under tackle.
Well, Jerry Burns has decided that 41 years in the coaching ranks is enough and retires after the 1991 season. He'll enjoy nearly 30 years of retirement before passing away in 2021. What sometimes gets lost about the guy amongst all the quirks, foibles, and F-bombs is his work as a true offensive genius and innovator. Vikings fans who are around for those Super Bowl runs like to point out that back in the 70s, he was more or less implementing what would later become famous as the West Coast offense. Just as memorable, though, was the respect he earned from his players throughout the years. Burns may not have been able to immediately recall their names half the time, but he knew and appreciated every other thing about them. To this day, you can ask any of his former players, whether big nuts, or even big nuts, and they'll all tell you the same thing. They all love Burnsy. Replacing Burns is Dennis Green, who at age 43 already has a terrific coaching resume. He won a Super Bowl ring as a receivers coach with the Niners, then left to turn around the Stanford program. Most impressive, though, might have been what he accomplished at Northwestern in the early 80s. This Northwestern program was putrid beyond your wildest dreams. They closed out the 70s with 3 total wins in 4 seasons, and when they lost, they often did so by humiliating margins. The students' favorite chant essentially became, "Yeah, but our grades are good." This march of the nerds continued unimpeded into Green's first season as head coach, during which they lost a home game 61-14 to Michigan State. This was Northwestern's 29th consecutive loss, which broke the all-time record for longest losing streak by a major college football program. As he watched Northwestern fans ironically rip down one of the goalposts in celebration of how crappy their own football team was, Green resolved to turn things around, and he kinda did. In '82, Dennis Green led the Wildcats to a 3-8 record, and they said, "Wait, you won 3 games at Northwestern? Holy shit, you win Big Ten Coach of the Year. Congratulations." Well, the bad news is that in Dennis Green's first 3 seasons, the Vikings are bounced from the first round of the playoffs all 3 times in unspectacular fashion, which extends their playoff game losing streak to 5. The good news, of course, is that Green got him there in the first place. It's extraordinarily rare for a rookie head coach in the NFL to take the reins of a team that's been out of the postseason for years and lead him there 3 times straight. This is going to lend him a great deal of job security in the years ahead. He's going to need it for a few reasons. Anyway, between 92 and 94, Minnesota finishes 11-5, 9-7, and 10-6. And while they do taper off at 8-8 and 95 and miss the playoffs, they see enormous contributions from Chris Carter, as well as John Randle and Randall McDaniel, who are easily my second and third favorite Randles of all time. I'm sure longtime viewers can guess the other one. In these 4 seasons, this trio is combined for 10 Pro Bowl invites. I suppose we could look at this 2 different ways. We could commend this franchise for once again refusing to backslide when every available indicator suggested they should have. Or we could wonder how much more might have been possible if only they'd held on to all those draft picks instead of shipping them off to Dallas. Hey, speaking of Dallas, let's see how all this turned out for Dallas. Congratulations to the Dallas Cowboys, winners of Super Bowl 27. This is their 3rd Super Bowl win. Congratulations to the Dallas Cowboys, winners of Super Bowl 28. This is their 4th Super Bowl win. Congratulations to the San Francisco 49ers, winners of Super Bowl 29. This is their 5th Super Bowl win. Congratulations to the Dallas Cowboys, winners of Super Bowl 30. This is their 5th Super Bowl win, and along the way, they've knocked off the Raiders to officially become the winningest team of the Super Bowl era to this point. Dallas would not have been able to pull this off without Minnesota's charity. The Vikings finally built a Super Bowl dynasty. They just built someone else's, that's all. The knife has not finished twisting. In 1996, a pretty mediocre Vikings squad finds a way to finish 9-7 and return to the playoffs for a first-round matchup against, well, guess who? Like every other dynasty, the Cowboys are an outstandingly deep and well-rounded squad, but Emmitt Smith has been their best and most important player. He's done for the Cowboys exactly what the Vikings had hoped Herschel Walker would do for them. Speaking of Herschel Walker, these Cowboys now also have Herschel Walker. That is correct. At the end of it all, sitting on their mountain of Lombardi trophies, the Cowboys feature not only the Hall of Famer they used the top Vikings pick on, but the very player they traded away to acquire that pick. This sucks.
The first time Dallas touches the ball, Emmett helps carry him down the field with 22 rushing yards plus an 8-yard reception and leading a Cowboys touchdown drive. But the double-digit underdogs fight back as quarterback Brad Johnson spots Amp Lee open over the middle, who's about to tie the game with nothing but daylight in front of him until Cowboys safety George Teague punches the ball out from behind at the last possible moment. Lee tries unsuccessfully to pounce on top of it, but it instead squirts out the back of the end zone for everybody's favorite rule, the fumble touchback. Time for Emmett to go back to work. He touches the ball on 4 of Dallas's first 5 plays of the ensuing drive, picking up 25 yards, then he's fed again on play 6 and pinballs off multiple Vikings and an official for another good game. Time for a well-deserved breather and for Herschel Walker to say hello for the first time today. A bit player this season, Walker hasn't even carried the football in front of the home fans here since week 2. But he does now and slices through the Vikings defense for over 20 yards. That leads to a field goal, and the very first Minnesota snap after that disastrous George Teague forced fumble ends up with another George Teague forced fumble, the second takeaway he's produced in as many plays. When the Cowboys take over, Emmett starts and finishes the drive in one fell swoop, putting his team up 17-0 and himself up over 100 yards from scrimmage after the game's 1/3 over. Another 2 Viking plays go by without any Teague-based turnovers before a 3rd down where Johnson does exactly what quarterbacks are coached their whole lives to do when rolling out of the pocket. Throw the ball as late as possible, off your back foot, across your body, high and over the middle of the field. Despite following all the sacred rules of quarterbacking, there's George Teague not just generating his 3rd takeaway in 5 plays, but also returning it all the way to the house to punctuate what has to be the most dominant individual 5-play stretch of defense in history. Dallas then decides to just turn this into a comedy. This time they only allow the Vikes the courtesy to run 1 play before Deion Sanders intercepts his college teammate. For those scoring at home, that is the 4th Vikings giveaway in 7 plays, 16 years after a playoff game in which they gave the ball away 7 times in a 15-play stretch. The first half is such a catastrophe for the Vikings that even when they pick off Cowboys quarterback Troy Aikman, they can't even finish the play before handing it right back over to them. Minnesota, after getting outscored 28-0 in their last half of play to close the regular season, now becomes the first team since the 1970 merger to find themselves shut out and down 30+ by halftime of a playoff game. The second half is nothing but 30 minutes of garbage time, meaning Herschel time. Despite having been mothballed for years, not having carried the ball more than 6 times in a game since 1994, Walker gashes the Vikings for another big play as the clock winds down in a 40-15 laugher. Minnesota's 6th straight postseason loss, tied for the longest streak ever, also helps Dennis Green make dubious personal history in a thoroughly humiliating performance.
Congratulations to the Green Bay Packers, winners of Super Bowl 31. This is their 3rd Super Bowl win. Strictly as a head coach, Dennis Green was a strong leader and incredible talent evaluator, and often a good tactician who nonetheless sometimes suffered catastrophic bouts of clock mismanagement. More broadly, he actively utilized his status as the second black head coach in modern NFL history to open the door for many others who would help shape the game's future, including Tony Dungy and Mike Tomlin. The record indicates that Green also played a major role in creating a nepotistic, toxic organizational culture that left many cast out or worse. At one point, running back Robert Smith, who you'll meet a little bit later and who held a lot of respect for Green as a coach, still describes him as a paranoid individual who he half-jokingly compares to Saddam Hussein. Remember Bob Hallway, Bud Grant's longtime defensive coordinator who Les Steckel demoted and alienated because he thought he was too old for the job? Well, in 1992, he served as the Vikings' assistant GM, tasked with leading the search for a new head coach. Hallway recommended Green, Green was hired, and Hallway was rewarded by being shut out again. Hallway would deserve more respect than this, even if he hadn't had a hand in developing the Purple People Eaters of the 60s and 70s. It would have been perfectly fine to simply move on from the guy. It's another thing entirely to send in an owner to tell him he's too old, lean on him to resign, and tighten the screws by giving him the Milton from Office Space treatment and literally shoving him into a closet. Meanwhile, Vikings defensive backs coach Richard Solomon is Dennis Green's right-hand man. The two are lifelong friends, and Solomon, despite multiple players describing him as not a particularly qualified defensive backs coach, holds a very unusual amount of clout within the organization for somebody in that role. On Super Bowl Sunday at the end of the '94 season, the Star Tribune reports that the team paid a six-figure settlement to an employee who claimed she was sexually harassed by Solomon. According to an affidavit, she was one of multiple women who said Solomon made them feel uncomfortable, and according to another employee, this allegation was completely swept under the rug by team personnel until an attorney intervened. The employee reportedly reached a settlement out of court. Days later, the Star Tribune reports that Dennis Green himself was the subject of a sexual harassment accusation during his time at Stanford, shortly before he joined the Vikings. Green denies any wrongdoing. A few months later, Vikings quarterback Warren Moon is the subject of a lawsuit accusing him of sexual battery against a former Vikings cheerleader. With a subsequent denial of allegations by Moon, the matter is settled before going to trial. The next year, Moon will be acquitted after standing trial for alleged assault against his wife, then will return to his role as the Vikings starting quarterback. Green dismisses all the resulting media attention as sensationalism and moves on. And that's that. Green doesn't discipline them, and no one disciplines Green. It's unclear whether anyone is inclined to take any action, and for that matter, it's unclear whether any one person actually could. For instance, two of the team's owners were apparently unhappy enough to disclose details about the Solomon settlement, whereas a third owner defended Solomon and claimed the woman who made the allegation was just looking for a payday. These are just 3 members of a 10-member ownership group that holds control of the Vikings. The quote-unquote 10-headed monster, Associated Press writer Ron Lesko calls him. Because there's no one majority owner, no one person who can be held to account, they seem largely content to fade into the background and maximize profits while not even bothering to spend the full amount allowed by the salary cap. This pattern of serious allegations, it seems, isn't really their problem. There used to be a mere 5 owners who had their share of spats but mostly kept it together. Although he never said so, it's easy to wonder whether Bud Grant saw the storm gathering, decided he wanted nothing to do with it, and got the hell out of there, because around that time in 1985, General Manager Mike Lynn, who was intent on winning a piece of the ownership pie, allegedly declared, quote, all-out war against team co-owner Max Winter. Another co-owner allegedly said he was going to throw Winter's, quote, 80-year-old ass on the street. More minority owners soon enter the picture and start slinging some mud of their own. There's an accusation of blackmail. Yet more owners get wedged in and muscled out, with a former owner calling the current owners a bunch of crybabies. It's an interesting look into how embarrassing and fundamentally miserable the 1% often insists on making their lives, but the NFL has had just about enough. The rules require every team to have an owner with an ownership stake of at least 30%. The Vikings instead have 10 owners with a 10% ownership stake apiece, and the NFL has given them until the end of 1997 to sort this out. Enter Dennis Green. It's rumored that at one point, a rogue 2-owner faction went off on their own looking for another coach to replace Green. Whether this was motivated by the allegations or by Green's inability to win a playoff game is unclear, but at any rate, Green threatens to sue those owners if they won't sell him their stakes. On what legal grounds? Also unclear. The identity of the mysterious benefactor who will provide him with the money to buy those stakes? Also unclear. Why he chooses to publicly reveal his master plan to become majority owner via a chapter of his autobiography that he publishes in the middle of the 1995 season? Impossible to say. By the time the book hits stores, he seems to have completely lost interest, dismissing the book he himself literally just wrote and published as a distraction, and about a week later disavowing his plans entirely. There are reasons why Green should lose his job, and there are reasons why you'd think he probably would lose his job, and the fact that he hasn't pretty clearly demonstrates that he's allowed to do whatever he wants, that there is no one person at the wheel of this ship who will say otherwise. We need someone to take hold here. Someone who will write this story, a true author who is willing to wear the captain's hat. After the 1997 season, best-selling author and noted hat enthusiast Tom Clancy swoops in from out of nowhere to present the leading bid for majority ownership of the Minnesota Vikings. When Clancy says he was moving in secrecy, he means it. One day there was not a single whisper of it, and the next day the papers are reporting that it's virtually a done deal. Anyone who's played Rainbow Six knows how this works. After stealthily moving through the map and winning the round, he talks shit in the chat and compares his rival bidder to Saddam Hussein. There's that name again. That rival bidder, Roger Hedrick, spends the next few weeks asking for the mods to intervene, but Clancy wins out. For a while, at least. Clancy's financials turned out to be a little shakier than originally thought, as he's currently in the throes of one of the most complicated divorce proceedings of all time. Meanwhile, he needs to secure the approval of the NFL's finance committee by presenting his pitch. Instead, he big-times him in favor of a media tour for his new book. "I am distinguished author Tom Clancy," he explains. "I am too important for your meeting. Tango down." With Clancy now out of the picture, in steps another bidder, Texas billionaire Red McCombs, who wins out and becomes the first ever sole owner of the Vikings. By this point, any arrangement other than the Vikings' smoke-filled room in the mid-90s seems like an improvement, and McCombs does possess the two most important qualifications for the job: lots of money and a cool hat. I think Americans tend to see something intensely familiar in the athletes we love. We see people who struggle and sometimes even succeed to transcend the rot of their institutions. We've seen this most dramatically in figures like Jesse Owens and Simone Biles. We also see it in the unpaid college athlete who knocks down the game-winning three, and the kick returner who knows his contract is not guaranteed as he fearlessly sprints right into the teeth of the special teams unit. We identify with this. We, like they, quite often belong to institutions we are far better than. These could be our employers, our governments, our religious denominations, or anything, and we don't quite possess the agency or capital or collective action to tip them over. Once in a while, we will see a hero like Joe Kapp who ignores the odds and throws his shoulder into it anyway, or an Alan Page who's willing to learn the tedious and academic language of capital to force concessions. Most of the time, though, neither they nor us make that kind of racket. Whether out of obstinance or because it's simply the thing that we know how to do, we get back to work making the sort of magic that our institutions do not deserve, but that we do. We're about to see two heroes who will offer us something the Minnesota Vikings always used to offer us: the power of myth. A rune that tells us of conquests and heroics that, decades later, still astonish those of us who uncover it. A legend to believe in. Greater Las Vegas area. Don't gamble when it comes to home remodeling. Come on down and see the experts at Custom Marble and Granite Accessories of Las Vegas. Whether you're after a modern look for your bathroom tile or a kitchen countertop that will stand the test of time, we can offer a marble or granite solution that works for you without slow rolling you on hidden costs and fees. So don't fold. Give Custom Marble and Granite Accessories a call. It's hard work down at Custom Marble and Granite Accessories. The hours are long, the stone's heavy, and if you drop it, that's that. And the more expenses you run up, the smaller savings you'll be able to pass on to the customer. But all in all, it's not so bad. Felicity, his wife, is there to manage the business while he focuses on the day-to-day, and there's something he really enjoys about it. The craftsmanship, the satisfaction he gets from making people happy. Although he did go to school around here, most people don't recognize him when he shows up at the doorstep. But once in a while, someone will ask him, "Hey, is that you?" And he says, "Yeah, that is me." In an earlier time, Randall Cunningham was a superstar. In Philadelphia with the Eagles, he'd picked up Fran Tarkenton's torch as the quintessential dual-threat quarterback, breaking his NFL record for quarterback rushing yardage in '92. Cunningham heavily modified the formula, however. Rather than primarily scrambling east and west to buy time to throw, he more often ran upfield with the direct intent of gaining yardage. It resulted in massive gains. In 1990, Cunningham ran with the ball more than 100 times and averaged 8 yards per carry. Forget just quarterbacks, no player at any position had done anything like that, and only 2006 Michael Vick will do so later. This also meant, though, that he took a whole lot more hits than Tarkenton did. Past a certain point, he just couldn't stay healthy, a contributing factor to his decision to retire at age 33 to start a marble business in his old college town of Las Vegas. In '97, Minnesota lures him out of retirement and offers him the backup job, and at first he only appears as the team's emergency punter, but late in the season Brad Johnson goes down with a neck injury. Cunningham steps in to start the final 3 games. The old legend looks a little rusty, losing the first 2. And while the third doesn't look so pretty either, he plays well enough to win, lock in the Vikings at 9-7, and lead them back into the playoffs.
It's the third time in 5 years Green has overseen a team that lost 7 games, got outscored for the season, and still qualified for the playoffs. So right off the bat, their chances of seizing all-time futility against the Giants with a 7th consecutive postseason loss seem pretty good. They get even better in a first half where New York scores 1 touchdown and caps most of their other drives with field goals to take a 16-point lead at the break. A third-quarter fumble by Giants rookie Tiki Barber deep in his own territory is the only reason Minnesota's finally able to score a touchdown to pull within 9. The teams trade fourth-quarter field goals, so the Vikes are still down 2 scores with 7 minutes left. They then take their sweet time, inexplicably chewing up 2.5 minutes to advance 19 yards. On a 3rd and 4 with 4 minutes and change to play, they inexplicably run the ball, get stuffed in the backfield, then inexplicably proceed to let the clock continue ticking away south of 4 minutes before inexplicably punting. It's as though they think they're up 2 scores. It's literally exactly how a team up 2 scores in the waning minutes would and should operate. 3:51 remains, and the Vikings have 2 timeouts at their disposal. They know the Giants will run 3 times, so barring a first down and after calling both timeouts, they should get the ball back with around 3 minutes left. After Rodney Hampton's number is called for the first of the 3 carries, the clock inexplicably continues to bleed down from 3:46. What are you doing, Dennis? What are you saving your timeouts for? Even if you figure you'll use them after 2nd and 3rd down, what if your defense forces a takeaway on one of those plays? Wouldn't an extra 40 seconds come in handy? What is the upside here? Whatever, fine, use them after 2nd and 3rd if you must. 2nd down, now instead with 3:06 on the clock, is another Hampton carry, and we get a Vikes timeout. With exactly 3 minutes remaining, Tiki Barber strings his 3rd down run toward the boundary, nearly goes out of bounds, but goes down with 2:54 left. Okay, Minnesota will now have just under 3 minutes left with an awfully tall task ahead of them to get the requisite 2 scores. So why is Green giving stilts to that task and trying to ruin his own team's slim chances by inexplicably letting his final timeout burn a hole in his pocket? The Vikings, after setting the Guinness World Record for most times a rapid-fire sequence of football decisions elicited the word inexplicably, instead get the ball back with just 2:06 to play. First down is an emotional roller coaster as Randall Cunningham's deep shot is nearly intercepted, then nearly caught before falling incomplete. On 2nd down, he completes a tight window throw to Carter, who gets down to the Giant 30-yard line, and who needs to call a timeout with 1:52 left when you can simply waste another 14 seconds and a down by spiking the ball with 1:38 left. The next snap, Cunningham looks for 6, and a streaking Jake Reed gets them all. Not without some controversy though, as it does appear a toe or two on Reed's left foot comes down over the end line. The play counts, but to pull a rabbit out of the hat, Minnesota still needs to recover an onside kick, a 1 in 20 shot, plus quickly score again. Eddie Murray's onside attempt heads straight toward the Giants' best receiver, Chris Callaway. But, much like a bad hop for a middle infielder, the ball gets away from him. Teammate Felipe Sparks has a chance, but it rolls the other way. Minnesota's Corey Fuller gets a hand on it, but can't secure it. New York's Percy Ellsworth gets both hands on it, but can't secure it, before eventually the Vikings' Chris Walsh smothers it, and, even as it becomes lodged between his legs, holds on for dear life. Minnesota has a pulse, but they're still about 25 yards from field goal range when, on 3rd down, Cunningham looks to Carter running a slant and squeezes another throw in there that takes him to the outskirts of field goal range, and once again, who needs to call timeout with 64 seconds left when you can simply waste 14 seconds and a down by spiking the ball with 50 seconds left? But they're bailed out. A defensive penalty and their ground game move them down to New York's 5, where, with the clock stopped, Green at last uses his final timeout he's been saving for so long to ice his own kicker. Murray's nevertheless able to kick the Vikes to a miraculous victory, ensuring they will not become the first team to ever lose 7 consecutive playoff games.
Whew. Well, there is that clock mismanagement I was talking about. This is not exclusively a Dennis Green thing. It still happens now, but it happened a whole lot up through the 90s and aughts. It was the wildest thing. Coaches could master all the most sophisticated things. They just couldn't or wouldn't do basic clock math. It drove fans up a wall, even kids like me. Football history is rife with games that would have ended differently if they'd paid a 15-year-old kid with a strong work ethic and a TI-83 $6 an hour to stand on the sidelines and figure this stuff out for him. I would have done a great job. The Vikings' opponent in the divisional round is the 49ers, who are once again an overwhelming favorite and who once again send him home with a decisive loss. But not before Cunningham shows us the shape of things to come in Minnesota. This season, he's reunited with an old friend, Chris Carter, who years ago was his favorite target in Philly. The two had connected for 17 touchdown passes, and now the far more experienced duo is back at it. Younger Randle had a very powerful arm, but his legs made him famous. That Randle, upon seeing this pocket collapse, probably would have decided to tuck and run. This Randle can see past the pressure, notice the Niners' blown coverage against Carter, and hook up his old buddy with a 66-yard score. We'll pause here for a very quick bit of housekeeping. Congratulations to the Denver Broncos, winners of Super Bowl 32. This is their first Super Bowl win, and it might be the most cathartic Super Bowl win ever. Previously, these Broncos had made it to 4 Super Bowls and gotten their asses kicked in every single one. Anyway, that touchdown strike was one of many demonstrations of an older, wiser, more comfortable Randall Cunningham. This man has been on a journey. At age 24, he thrust himself into just about the most high-pressure scenario one can imagine. Not only was he a young franchise quarterback trying to deliver for a Philadelphia fan base, he was also a black quarterback in an era when that was extremely uncommon. The pressure was cranked up even further by a famously paper-thin offensive line that often sent him running for his life. In fact, poor Randle was one of the most sacked men in all of history. Stack up the 25 most sacked quarterback seasons of all time, and Eagles' Randall Cunningham accounts for 4 of them. He did everything he could for as long as he could just to keep himself on the field. He ran, he threw, he even punted when the Eagles needed him to. He did a lot of winning, but not enough for a Super Bowl, and not nearly enough to make everybody happy. Op-ed columnist number 1 says you need to be more vocal, so he's more vocal. Op-ed columnist number 2 says, hey, shut up. It all got to him. He worried too much about what people were saying, what people were thinking, which quarterback was just around the corner waiting to take his job. It fed into a growing inability to get along well with anybody, really. Unable to retain his starting role in Philly or find one anywhere else, Randall Cunningham retired. He's back in the NFL now after realizing that having a normal job is hard and kinda sucks. In developing a newfound respect for the working person, he realized just how fortunate he was to have played football at all. As a devout Christian who will later become a pastor, he's reconnected with his faith and found a sense of peace he didn't have before. But the final nudge out of retirement was made during a round of golf with Michael Jordan. Mike, no stranger of unretirements himself, pulled out a cigar and said, "Look at this. This is a championship cigar. You don't have one of these, do you, Randall?" And that just about did it. Randall is Obi-Wan Kenobi, a wise old man many years removed from his ancient adventures, long content to fade into the obscurity of the desert planet of Nevada, but now willing to embark upon one final adventure. It's in the next season, 1998, that he finds his Luke Skywalker. In the summer of 1996, while Randall Cunningham was cutting marble in Vegas and 10 rich people were busy inventing new insults to throw at each other, Randy Moss was sitting in solitary confinement in a West Virginia jail. Every day he was allowed to step out for exactly 1/2 hour. His path to that cell began the year prior as a senior at DuPont High School outside of Charleston. He first landed in hot water when he disappeared from class for suspiciously long amounts of time. Nobody knew where he went. Turned out he was sneaking out to the special ed classroom where he would spend time with his buddy Ronald. The world saw these two in very different ways, but they'd formed a bond. Randy liked the guy. To him, that's all that mattered. The standout of standouts at wide receiver, Moss is perhaps the most heavily recruited high schooler in America. Notre Dame coach Lou Holtz says something no one ever says about a high school football player. that he would have a fighting chance if he skipped college and went straight to the NFL right now. He's just that good. Many of the most prestigious programs you can name call him on the phone as often as the rules allow him to. He'd like to go to school out of state since he hasn't done much traveling, and the idea of getting out of here appeals to him. It's easy to understand. Moss describes his experience at DuPont High as hell. The student body is overwhelmingly white, and racism is a daily fact of life. One wing of the school, known as quote-unquote Redneck Alley, is understood to be completely off limits to black students. All over the school are racial slurs carved into desks and bathroom stalls. Out of necessity, he and his fellow black students stick together, and one day, a friend of his has seen one act of bigotry too many. He decides he's going to confront the suspected offender, who investigators later say was not involved, and he asks Randy to come along and back him up. His friend starts swinging on the kid, and Randy, who's not at all violent by nature, finally feels years of anger boil over. He kicks the kid a couple of times, and although his friend causes the serious injuries, Randy is no longer a minor, having just turned 18 a month ago. So he's charged with malicious wounding and eventually sentenced to 30 days in jail. Notre Dame declares him to be an academic risk and withdraws their scholarship offer, but Holtz recommends him to Florida State coach Bobby Bowden. Moss heads to FSU after making arrangements to come back to West Virginia and serve the remainder of his sentence later. When he does, he tests positive for marijuana, and his sentence is extended to 90 days. That is why Randy Moss is now sitting in solitary confinement. Smoking pot. Florida State shuts the door on him. West Virginia expresses interest, but since it's a Division 1A school, Randy would have to sit out another year. He instead chooses Marshall, a program that's just about to move up to 1A but hasn't yet, meaning he can play right now. He's made the papers all over the country for years now, and he's under a magnifying glass, with people practically lurking behind the bushes waiting for him to, improperly sort his recycling or something. Moss understands this very well, and he refuses to give anybody anything, locking down with a level of restraint, focus, and dedication that I doubt any of his detractors could find within themselves if they'd endured the same things he did. All he does is assemble the Randy Moss Man Among Boys mixtape. That is just about the highest compliment they have for you as a high school or college football player. Typically, it's a more literal description of your size, in the way Vince Wilfork or Warren Sapp were just 10 times bigger than everybody else on the field. At 6'4", Randy is a pretty big dude, but when they call him a man among boys, that is not what they're talking about. This is his quarterback, Chad Pennington, who also has a long NFL career ahead of him, facing 3rd and 6 at his own 10. He'll later say that Randy was basically the only wideout ever to serve as the quarterback's go-to checkdown option. This tends to surprise everybody, including this camera operator, who expects Randy to be somewhere up there. Nope, just caught a little screen. There he is, surrounded by a triangle of Army defenders. Randy slips right out of that and right into a devastating ankle-breaking juke without really losing any momentum. Here's his track and field stuff as he simultaneously hurdles past one guy and over another, again without really slowing down at all. When he can't elude a defender, he often simply attacks him, swatting away Army's last remaining hope with a decisive stiff arm, and from here, it's just a matter of Randy Moss being the fastest guy on the field, which he always is. Including here, during this snowy game against Toledo. Randy's been trying not to showboat, but he's created so much separation here that he just cannot help himself. He'll get a flag for this as he just sort of giddy-ups his way into the end zone. He's just bored. He simply does not belong at this level of the sport. Since he's in Division 2, he's not 1, but 2 levels below where he should be. It almost feels impolite to watch him do this. But the one thing he didn't show you in those clips is his signature skill, the one he's going to become most famous for in the NFL. The ability to outmuscle any defender anywhere to make a contested catch. In 2023, getting mossed is in the common football vernacular. If you're a corner or a safety who gets absolutely bullied out of a jump ball situation, you got mossed. Finally, the 1998 draft is here. It's a pretty loaded draft class that features not only Moss and Peyton Manning, but Charles Woodson and later Alan Faneca, Fred Taylor, and Hines Ward. And it's tonight when the Vikings get to exact just a little bit of revenge on their eternal antagonists. Among other unsavory things, the NFL draft is largely an hours-long monument to bullshit, and it's bullshit the Cowboys are just about to fall for. While they're on the clock with the 8th pick, Chris Myers explains why they will not be spending that pick on Randy Moss.
One concern the Cowboys had in this study was any player who mixed substance abuse,
again, smoking weed, one time,
with violent behavior,
again, getting in a fight as a high schooler one time after enduring years of hate speech,
was something they wanted to stay away from.
One fight and one joint. Myers probably just described, 50 million Americans? Regardless, the Cowboys are duped by this nonsense. They select Greg Ellis, who will be very good, but who will not be Randy Moss. Meanwhile, Dennis Green is unimpressed with that line of logic. Chris Carter was supposedly big trouble when the Vikings claimed him off waivers, and he's excelled here. In that spirit, when team after team passes on Randy, he falls all the way to Minnesota, who selects him 21st overall. Good move? Well, let's all find out together. We're going to jump ahead in time now to Thanksgiving Day 1998, the 12th game of rookie Randy Moss's NFL career.
Playing in Texas Stadium against the Cowboys, it's another game rife with emotion against the team that has tormented them for decades. And even though Dallas is 8-3, the Vikings have been utterly dominant all season, entering today with a 10-1 record. Plus, now the game's even got the additional element of Randy Moss facing the team that lied to him, the team that would have picked him but for Jerry Jones overruling everyone in his organization. And if Moss weren't licking his chops enough, the Cowboys enter the Turkey Day showdown depleted in their secondary with 2 of their top 3 cornerbacks sidelined, one of whom perhaps you're familiar with. Randy wastes 0 time showing them what they're missing. On the 4th play of the game, Dallas bites hard on a flea flicker, which leaves no one within a country mile of Moss, who easily gallops in for the 51-yard touchdown. On Minnesota's 2nd possession, Randall Cunningham fits a pass in there to Chris Carter, who takes it the rest of the way for a 54-yard score. Carter's not even supposed to be here anymore, at least not according to his initial plans disclosed after the 94 season when he revealed an intention to retire after the 97 season. But he's still here, still excelling, and now, midway through the first quarter, the Vikes have had the ball twice and have launched passing touchdowns from their own side of the field twice. On the very first play of their 3rd possession, Cunningham notices the Cowboys choosing to leave Kevin Smith in single coverage against Moss. Dallas is just asking to get torched again, so Cunningham obliges, audibling the play to have Moss go deep, and even with Smith interfering around the 25-yard line, Moss hauls in his 2nd and the team's 3rd 50-plus yard touchdown through the air in as many total possessions, barely 12 minutes into the game. Those would be all of Minnesota's 50-yard fireworks for the first half, but they restock in the locker room. On their first drive of the second half, they encounter a 3rd and forever. Might as well send Moss deep. He's covered, but who cares? Might as well throw the ball to the sky anyway, because he'll either still come down with it, or, as he does here, draw a massive pass interference penalty that moves the ball 50 yards downfield to set up another Vikings touchdown. To close the 3rd quarter, Moss decides to switch it up. It's as though he's bored of catching 50-yard touchdown bombs, so instead he dabbles in catching a quick, short pass, shrugs off a tackler like he's not even there, zooms down the sideline, and fakes a cut inside that prompts just enough hesitation from approaching Cowboys to leave him in the dust to score his 3rd 50-yard touchdown catch of the game. Doesn't matter what form they take. He just can't help himself. In the NFL's final season before Randy Moss entered, no player caught 3 such touchdowns all year. Hell, nearly every team failed to produce 3 such touchdowns, with nearly a quarter of the league, including these Vikings, goose-egged. Then all of a sudden, a 21-year-old rookie comes along and drops that triumvirate by himself in one damn game. It's too stupid even for a Disney movie. In the 4th quarter, their ground game gets in on the 50-yard touchdown fun, with Leroy Horde getting the honors. The offense then mercifully folds up its tent on this one after that 5th 50-yard TD. In front of the entire nation, their statement has been made. Moss's Herculean efforts in this game were part of a rookie season unlike anything seen before. He topped 1,300 receiving yards and caught an extraordinary 17 touchdowns in '98. In the very first quarter of his career, Moss gives a glimpse of what's to come when he burns Bucs corner Floyd Young. Hall of Fame safety John Lynch is even assigned to provide help. He just grossly underestimates Moss's speed, making him completely irrelevant to the play, and can only watch as Moss slows down, tips an underthrown Brad Johnson pass up to himself, and catches the rebound for a 48-yard touchdown. During the fourth quarter in Chicago 3 weeks later, Randall Cunningham, who has become the full-time starting quarterback in the wake of a Week 2 Johnson sprained ankle, is about to get blasted and just chucks it up toward 2 Bears and 1 Moss, which equals a 44-yard score. The next Monday night at Lambeau Field, on his very first career primetime snap, the Packers also underestimate his speed as he accelerates behind everyone for a 75-yard touchdown, only for a holding penalty to wipe it away. So in the second quarter, he goes back to work. Cunningham throws another deep pass his way, and despite great coverage from Tyrone Williams, Moss plucks the ball out of the air. Allen Iverson's over Tyrone, eludes the safety, and trots in for the 52-yard TD. In the fourth quarter, Williams is again perfectly positioned, but Cunningham tosses up another jump ball, and Moss once more comes down with another spectacular long catch and score. Against the Bengals, Cunningham spots Moss with a one-on-one matchup, who hauls in the bomb Willie Mays style for the touchdown from 61 yards out. The next week in their rematch with the Packers, Cunningham goes for the kill with 3 minutes left on this deep pass to Moss, who has slipped beyond safety help, and as multiple Packer DBs wipe each other out, Moss spins gracefully into the end zone. Right after halftime of the Vikings' final home regular season game, we see another flea flicker that prevents the defense from being able to keep up with Moss on a 43-yard touchdown. In addition to the Thanksgiving bludgeoning, we just showed you another 8 touchdowns Moss scored this season that covered more than 40 yards, 7 of which counted. That gives him a grand total of 10 such receiving touchdowns for the season. Let us dive into how absurd that would be for any individual player, let alone a 21-year-old rookie. In a comparison to the teams of '98, even when looping in scores on the ground for a look at all such touchdowns from scrimmage, Moss still would be the leading team unto himself. The NFL is now at the mercy of the Minnesota Vikings, and specifically their brand new, sublime superstar.
Remember how they couldn't stop calling Randy Moss a man among boys during his days at Marshall? Well, they're still calling him that. Bad news, everybody. The NFL is the top rung. We've run out of places to promote him to. You're gonna have to spend the next decade plus trying to figure out how to solve for this. You're stuck with him. These 1998 Vikings finished with a 15-1 record, their only loss being a 27-24 squeaker at the hands of Tampa Bay. It's only the third time an NFL team has won 15 games in the regular season. The other teams were the '84 Niners, who annihilated their opponent in the Super Bowl, and the '85 Bears, who also annihilated their opponent in the Super Bowl. This is the rarest of sights, a season in which everything has worked, everything has clicked. This even includes the kicking game, which was, and this is a descriptor you never get to use in football, literally perfect. The first thing you tend to notice about Gary Anderson is the single bar face mask he wears decades after virtually everybody else in the NFL moved on from it. He finds it easier to see through as he follows through with his kicks, and he's so adamant about using it that after he left Pittsburgh early in his career, he unscrewed the mask from his helmet and took it with him. Anderson explains that teams never have this kind of face mask available, so he's taken this discontinued product with him from Pittsburgh to Philly to San Fran, now to Minnesota, and later to Tennessee. I'll admit I'm a little bit skeptical of this story. Did he really strip the paint off the bar and repaint it every time he went to a new team? Regardless, it's another one of the myths we find so compelling around here, and it's one he reinforces with his flawless 1998 season. This season, the Vikings have asked Anderson to kick 35 field goals and 59 extra points, and he's made every single one of them. He is the first kicker in NFL history to 100% ace it with anywhere near this much of a workload. A big reason for this is that the 39-year-old hasn't been asked to kick a whole lot of long ones. Though this shouldn't diminish his achievement at all, nearly all his kicks were attempted from inside the 30-yard line, where kickers are generally expected to bang it through most of the time. The game situation almost never compelled the Vikings to ask him to kick from a longer distance because they excelled at pushing the ball further down the field, and in a related matter, they spent a whole lot of the season in cruise control, having built such gigantic leads that they were rarely hard up for points. That is what you get to do when you field the greatest offense the sport of football has ever seen.
As the quarterback feeding Moss's historic campaign, you can imagine Randall Cunningham made quite a bit of history himself in 1998. By the end of the regular season, aside from 1984 Dan Marino, Cunningham's body of work arguably exceeds any other prior season by any other quarterback in history. And from the quarterback perspective of those lengthy aerial touchdowns, Cunningham's total of 13 puts him in a league of his own even to this day. Chris Carter will go on to post his 6th consecutive 1,000-yard season as the Vikings' passing attack is unstoppable all year. They have such an embarrassment of riches out wide that Jake Reed, one of the league's top receivers since becoming a starter in '94, has been relegated to number 3 wideout in Minnesota. And when defenses would cheat toward playing the pass, there was 6th-year back Robert Smith keeping him more honest than Shakira's hips, averaging the league's 3rd most yards per carry in a Pro Bowl season. Throw in a perfect kicker, and it all adds up to an offense that becomes the first to ever score at least 24 points in every game. They'll average just a shade under 35 for the season, at the time the most in the Super Bowl era. Combine that offense with a defense that was one of just 6 in the league to allow fewer than 300 points, and this team was a point differential juggernaut. 1998 remains the only season to produce 3 14-game winners, and the Vikings still stand head and shoulders atop the class with a mark of plus 260. Throughout the entirety of the Super Bowl era, that comes within a whisker of besting 91 Washington, while decades will pass afterward with no one but the 99 Rams and 07 Pats reaching such lofty heights.
Offensive coordinator Brian Billick receives a lot of credit for all these fireworks, and deservedly so. He's got an excellent head coaching career ahead of him, and here in '98 he's worked closely with R&D director Mike Ayers, a largely unsung hero here to squint through every available piece of tape and build a database full of their opponent's play calling behavior. From there, they isolate a team's preferred ace in the hole, the play they always seem to like to call in a particular situation. It's paid off big this season, and although every team does this in 2023, these Vikings were among the first. Another unsung hero is quarterbacks coach Chip Myers. There's something unmistakably Bud Grant about him. In the only photo we have on file from him during this season, he's out fishing. He regularly heads out to Lake Minnetonka on Fridays and Saturdays, a ritual that stands out in a profession of workaholics. Like Bud, he has a calm, unshakable demeanor that never seems to change. Formerly the Vikings wide receivers coach, as well as a retired NFL wideout himself, Myers has a unique understanding of the history-making receiving core Randall Cunningham has at his disposal, but perhaps more importantly, he gets Randle himself. These numbers reflect the overall strength of this roster, but they also speak to their quarterback's love of the sport. Cunningham had lost that love, and that's a very difficult thing to get back. He says it's Chip Myers who helped him find it, and who made this season possible. Winning teams are full of people like this. People who are rarely seen on broadcasts or read about in the paper, but who nonetheless make it all happen in ways those of us on the outside will never see.
The Vikings enter the '98 postseason with home field advantage throughout, as hot can be in a city that's as cold can be, albeit moot for this game against the Arizona Cardinals inside the Metrodome. They face little resistance in marching down the field for an opening drive touchdown, and after their defense forces a 3-and-out, they reach the Cards' 7-yard line, on the verge of going up 2 scores. Cunningham looks for Moss running a slant, but Arizona has assigned Hall of Famer Aeneas Williams, one of the great cover corners of all time, to shadow him this game, and Williams couldn't anticipate what's coming or undercut the route any better in killing that threat. After Cards QB Jake Plummer threw 2 first-quarter incompletions, his third pass sails wildly away from him for an easy interception by safety Robert Griffith. The next play is a Cunningham jump ball to Moss that he comes down with over Williams that helps lead to a 15-yard Andrew Glover touchdown. And when Arizona takes over, their next play is another high, errant pass that Griffith again intercepts to set up a Minnesota field goal, which means 3 things. 1, Plummer has completed multiple passes to the same Viking before completing his first pass to a Cardinal. 2, the Vikings are up 3 scores before a Cardinal completion or first down. And 3, this is now Minnesota's second playoff game in the last 3 years in which the home team safety took the ball away on consecutive snaps. Even when Arizona responds with a Mario Bates touchdown, Leroy Hoard does the same with his second score, restoring the Vikes' 17-point lead just before halftime. The Cardinals never mount a serious challenge in a second half that's nevertheless noteworthy for a few reasons, the first of which is Randy Moss scoring his first ever playoff touchdown. Then a bunch more Bates and Hoard TDs result in, to this day, the only playoff game in which both teams had a player score 3 touchdowns, and both players just happened to be backups. And finally, on their very last defensive play of the game, with victory in the bag, their emotional leader and future Hall of Fame D-lineman John Randle suffers a severely hyperextended knee when teammate Derek Alexander inadvertently crashes into him, throwing his status for the following week's NFC Championship game in serious jeopardy.
It's already easy to forget that for quite some time the Vikings began every single season with the expectation of reaching the Super Bowl. They'd almost lived there, having punched their ticket 4 times in 8 years. Over the ensuing 2 decades and change, they'd only even made it to the doorstep of the Super Bowl once. The drought has extended to an unthinkable 22 years, but they've never had a better chance of ending it than they do right now. These 1998 Vikings are among the all-time greatest NFL teams. The rest of the league has found itself completely unable to counter or even mitigate their relentless offensive onslaught. Seemingly completely out of ideas, the NFC tosses one final, unusual obstacle in their way: the Atlanta Falcons, whose accomplishments over their 33-year history have amounted to almost nothing.
After their 20-point win over the Cardinals in the divisional round, the Vikings have outscored their opposition by 209 points across their 9 regular and postseason home games. Entering Conference Championship Sunday, that number sets the gold standard, tied by the next year's Rams, but still unsurpassed for decades to come. And to throw some cold water on the 99 Rams, they're the only team in the entire Super Bowl era to have only played 1 regular season game against a team that finished with a winning record, and that came on the road too. This is unequivocally the all-time ultimate home team. All year long, Viking fans have packed their stadium to watch their team spank the opposition. Just the one Metrodome victim left to complete their glorious, long-awaited journey from frigid Minnesota to sunny Miami for a berth in Super Bowl 33. Quarterback Chris Chandler leads the 11-point underdogs right downfield as Atlanta scores an immediate touchdown. Randy Moss puts the team on his back to begin a trek down a similar path when the Vikings get the ball for the first time. Their first pass play is a 9-yard grab by the Rook, and their first third down is another of his patented jump balls that draws a 30-yard interference flag. And the first play after that, he runs a deep post and toasts the corner for a game-tying, toe-tapping touchdown. When the Falcons take over, they lose a fumble, with Gary Anderson's continued perfection on a subsequent field goal giving Minnesota the lead. Atlanta's first play after their fumble is another fumble, with Orlando Thomas stripping tight end O.J. Santiago and fellow safety Robert Griffith there for the scoop, continuing his nose for the ball this postseason. The Vikings smell blood and do not relent. Brian Billick dials up a nifty little fake reverse screen pass to Moss that picks up 18 to reach the red zone. Their run game takes over from there, with Cunningham sneaking into the end zone for the 10-point lead. On the next Falcon series, John Randle, who has somehow suited up while basically playing on one leg, manages to get a great outside rush, forcing Chandler to step up in the pocket where he's gobbled up for a sack. The next snap, there's Randle, again responsible for putting Atlanta in reverse. Ever since allowing a first drive touchdown, Minnesota's defense has taken the ball away twice and produced a negative 9-yard 3-and-out. With more Anderson clockwork and a defense staying sizzling and forcing another punt, the Vikes go for their 5th score in as many possessions with just over a minute left in the first half. Following 2 incompletions, Cunningham drops back on 3rd down, and just as he's winding up to pass, Atlanta's Chuck Smith whacks his arm, stripping the ball with the Falcons recovering in the red zone. One play later, wideout Terrence Mathis slips free in between zone defenders to quiet the raucous party inside the Metrodome as all of a sudden the Vikes' lead has dwindled to 6 at the half, only some Gary Anderson field goals separating the two clubs. The whirlwind, sack, strip, touchdown has energized the Falcons as they force a punt to open the second half and drive down to Minnesota 7, where they face a third and maybe a foot. They're on the brink of storming in front as Chandler has the luxury of handing the ball to Jamal Anderson, who last month became just the 8th player in NFL history to rush for over 1,800 yards in a season. He cuts back across the field where he likes his chances one-on-one against cornerback Jimmy Hitchcock, who's all alone on the backside of the play. If he beats him, he'll walk into the end zone, but Hitchcock gets just enough of the first-team All-Pro for a key stop to force a field goal try. Like the Vikings, the Falcons employ their own all-time great place kicker in his 17th year named Anderson, and he brings his team within 3. On 3rd and 10, Minnesota desperately needs a spark offensively, and they turn to Chris Carter, who settles in between 4 Falcons to move the chains. A little over a minute later on another 3rd and long, Carter again gets open at the sticks to convert with some broken tackles and extra yardage to boot. After moving down inside Atlanta's 10 early in the 4th quarter, Cunningham slings a pass to a diving Matthew Hatchett to give the Vikings a little breathing room. Or, according to the belief percolating in Red McCombs' suite, a lot of breathing room. On their next snap, the Vikings defense nearly picks Chandler on 1st down and clobbers him on 2nd when he lines up out wide as a free target on a gadget play. But he's able to bounce back with an absolutely gorgeous deep bomb that he drops right in the bucket for speedster Tony Martin, whose huge 70-yard catch has the Falcons in prime position to score another touchdown to pull back within 3. However, back-to-back passes bounce off Terrence Mathis's hands, and the Falcons have to settle for another Anderson field goal. After the teams trade punts, the Vikings give the ball away on a bad snap exchange, with Atlanta taking over on Minnesota's 30. They gain 6 yards over the next 3 plays to set up a 4th and 4 on the 24 with 6 minutes left. Needing a touchdown, they go for it, and a Chandler pass to Mathis gets deflected incomplete as the Vikings dodge a bullet. The Falcons could have chosen to kick a field goal to go down 4, which would still require them to score a touchdown, but the one thing it would have done is afford them the ability to then allow a field goal. Instead, if the Vikings can now find a way to drain some clock and tack on just one more score of any kind, that will secure the win and punch their Super Bowl ticket. For this clock-killing, conference title-clinching drive, they lean on Robert Smith. 4 of their first 5 plays are handoffs to their star back, and he picks up at least 8 yards on all of them, moving his team inside Atlanta's 30-yard line, comfortably within field goal range of their perfect kicker. And they're still able to run another 5 plays, pick up another 8 yards, bleed over 2 more minutes off the clock, and force the Falcons to burn 2 timeouts. Then, for a 38-yard field goal try, basically a chip shot in a dome, they send out their perfect kicker with just over 2 minutes remaining to ice the game.
We have studied this Atlanta Falcon. Every last feather, every loss that populates it, every occasional win that accents its jagged, hideous form. There are some teams that God loves, even the Vikings, as complicated and uncertain as that love can sometimes be. There are other teams that God has simply forgotten. The Falcons are the team that God regrets. As far ahead as 2022, they will never win a Super Bowl, but they will lose the most catastrophic Super Bowl of all time. A single loss that will bring more agony than 50 conventional one-sided Super Bowl losses combined. The Atlanta Falcons offer jokes. Cruel jokes. This is all they are ever good for.
That's a pretty good bet. If you say, do you think Gary Anderson will make this field goal? The answer should probably be yes.
39 yards away, and it's not good.
Did you hear that cannon? It's fired for 2 occasions. When the Vikings score and when the cannon's operator is under the impression that they score. We can't blame the operator for assuming that Gary Anderson, who had successfully put the ball through the uprights 125 times in a row leading up to this moment, almost certainly the longest such streak in the history of football to date, made this one too. From only 38 yards out, by only about 9 inches, under a dome where there is no wind, he missed it.
Left for dead, the Falcons have now been resuscitated, and after a couple underneath completions are good for 11 yards, Chandler pushes the ball downfield against a soft zone with a 29-yard completion advancing him to the Vikings' 31. The following play is an errant pass that Robert Griffith comes excruciatingly close to turning into a game-clinching 4th takeaway in 2 games. Still unable to deliver the dagger, that opens the door for a 9-yard scramble and 6-yard Anderson carry to move the ball to the 16. The next pass Chandler throws after that near Griffith pick is another near Griffith pick. Still unable to deliver the dagger, the Vikes give Chandler yet another chance where they flush him out of the pocket, only to see him rifle a pass to the end zone for Mathis, who hangs on through tight coverage and a big hit from Griffith to tie the game. A pretty devastating turn of events, but Minnesota does still have nearly a minute to play with and all 3 timeouts in their pocket when they start their next drive, needing to move about 40 to 45 yards to give Gary Anderson the ultimate shot at redemption. And not even that much to give the ultimate jump ball receiver a chance to come down with a Hail Mary. First play is a 7-yard Cunningham scramble followed by a timeout. After a deep pass to Moss doesn't connect, the Vikings still have 2 timeouts and there are still 30 seconds on the clock. Maybe 10 yards from Hail Mary range and 40 yards from a very makeable field goal attempt. But on 3rd and short, Dennis Green has the team that just rewrote the offensive record book all season long take a knee.
Now they're just going to let things run out and we'll settle for overtime.
He doesn't want to take a chance with 30 seconds, 2 timeouts, and an all-time great offense because in the event of a punt, he's apparently scared of what the Falcons might do with much less than 30 seconds and 0 timeouts. If you think the prospect of a team driving for a game-winning field goal in 15 or so seconds with 0 timeouts and almost certainly worse field position than you currently have is so terrifying, shouldn't 30 seconds and 2 timeouts, the situation currently at your disposal, inherently be even more likely to produce a score and thus even more terrifying for your opponent? Shouldn't you necessarily embrace this opportunity if you're petrified of the objectively less advantageous version by your opponent? The answer, Dennis, is yes. Yes, you should. But instead, you let him off the hook. It seems likely he's spooked by the memory of Chuck Smith's strip sack that changed the tide of the game near halftime, and he responds by overreacting and just throwing all rational logic out the window.
In order to give Gary Anderson a decent look at a game-winning field goal in regulation, the Vikings would have needed to gain about 40 more yards within a pretty short window. 40 yards for a great chance at punching their ticket to the Super Bowl. This season, Randall Cunningham is the greatest big play quarterback ever. Randy Moss is the ultimate big play receiver. WR2 and WR3 are also fantastic big play options. Even if you want to do something weird and give it to your running back, Robert Smith is one of the NFL's premier big play backs. Together, these men, in this season, form likely the greatest big play offense of all time. StatHead allows us to search for every play from scrimmage that went for at least 40 yards between 1994 and 2022. Within this span, these 1998 Vikings were, by a decisive margin, more prolific with 40-plus yard plays than any other team. In the 24 years to follow, despite all the fireworks we're going to see throughout the NFL, we will never see a big play team as fearsome as this one. With 30 seconds and 2 timeouts, Randall Cunningham could use the whole field. He doesn't really have to worry about throwing to the sideline. And while yes, Atlanta's secondary is playing deep, expecting pass, the Vikings have the luxury of picking up yardage across a couple of chunks. And Atlanta, despite fielding a great defense this year, has actually been more vulnerable to big plays than most. All that, it seems, is fully counteracted by the threat of the Falcons intercepting a deep ball, something pretty rare against Cunningham this year, and doing something with it with, say, 25 seconds and 0 timeouts. Far more hopeless circumstances than the ones in front of the Vikings right now. When then offensive coordinator Jerry Burns called Squadron Right to orchestrate the miracle at the Met in 1980, he was rolling the dice, and he knew it. He was looking for, quote, some damn thing. Whether that thing was a great catch, blown coverage, pass interference, something. He gambled because it would have been crazy not to. In these circumstances, a gamble seems both more safe and just as necessary. In 1998, overtime ends in sudden death with the first score, and a coin flip decides who gets possession. This could very well be the last time Randall Cunningham's history-making offense gets to touch the ball in this game, and Green is telling him to keep the Ferrari in the garage. It's true that statistics can only tell you so much, that there are mountains of football wisdom on that Vikings sideline and decades of experience and good old-fashioned instinct that eludes people like us. So typically, I'd feel compelled to defer to Green to some extent here when he says that his offense just wasn't clicking in that moment and that pushing the envelope here could have resulted in disaster. Unfortunately, I can't really do that, and the reason I can't really do that is that after the game, Dennis Green will reveal that he thought he didn't have any timeouts left. He, in fact, had 2 timeouts. He did not know how many timeouts he had.
To overtime we go. In the sudden death frame, the Vikings win the coin toss and will therefore receive the football first. When they encounter a third down, Cunningham targets Moss, but multiple Falcons deflect the pass as their connection has completely fizzled out after such a hot start to the game. Minnesota's forced to punt, but their defense gets a stop to give the ball back to their offense. On 3rd and long, Moss runs deep and signals frantically for the ball as he zooms past his one-on-one matchup with safety Eugene Robinson, thoughts of a walk-off touchdown in his mind. Cunningham has similar thoughts, but doesn't get quite enough juice on the ball, allowing Robinson to recover just enough to break up the pass and continuing the precipitous 180-degree drop-off in Moss's production. Including the 30-yard pass interference he drew in the first quarter, this was the 14th pass thrown his way today. The first 7 had produced over 100 yards and a touchdown through a little more than a quarter. But of the last 7, spanning more than 3 quarters, 6 fell incomplete to go along with a single 4-yard catch. That leads to another punt, and after a regulation in which he only caught the one 13-yard pass that he promptly fumbled away, O.J. Santiago starts the Falcon drive with a 15-yard reception. On Chandler's next pass, he again looks to Santiago, where a beautiful 26-yard completion moves him into Minnesota territory. Then, a few running plays advance the ball down to, ironically, virtually the exact location where Gary Anderson missed his kick near the end of regulation. And now, with the Falcons' Anderson getting his shot to kick a conference title clinching field goal, he sends it right down Broadway.
Congratulations to the Denver Broncos, winners of Super Bowl 33. This is their 2nd Super Bowl win. In the memories of Vikings fans, this decade effectively ends in 1998. While Randy Moss will be hauling in many more stupefying catches in a purple jersey, Randall Cunningham won't be the one throwing them. Brian Billick leaves after this season to take the top job in Baltimore, where he'll very quickly win a Super Bowl, and the Vikings promote Chip Myers to succeed him as offensive coordinator. Weeks later, Myers suffers a heart attack and tragically passes away at age 53. His death shocks everyone in the organization, with fellow coaches and players describing him as not only a brilliant coach, but a person everyone in the building truly loved. Cunningham, who credited Myers for helping him rediscover his love of football, is devastated. The next season, as Cunningham toughs it out through a hip injury, his numbers return to earth. They're not too bad, but they're nowhere near where he was during his superhuman 1998, and they're not good enough for him to keep his starting job. Randle hits the bench, rides it for the rest of the season, and spends the rest of his career as a backup in Dallas and Baltimore, closing out an astonishing journey from game-breaking mobile quarterback to malcontent to bathroom renovator to backup quarterback to pocket-passing deep ball leviathan, and now, as though that last chapter had never happened at all, to backup quarterback again. He's ready for that now. At last, where he is where he belongs. Here and now, the reins are handed to the recently acquired Jeff George, a once-and-future malcontent who's been on a similar journey. George plays the best quarterback of his life, sparking a turnaround that lands the Vikings back in the playoffs. There they meet the Cowboys on the tail end of their dynasty. In the final playoff game of Emmitt Smith's career, the Vikings worked themselves into a hole early, but they rallied to send Dallas home decisively 27-10. It's satisfying to see the Vikings deal the final blow. The Cowboys won 5 of the first 30 Super Bowls. Ever since, the Cowboys haven't won a Super Bowl, they haven't been to a Super Bowl, and they haven't even really come all that close. In the divisional round, the Vikings run into the Rams, who moved to St. Louis a few years prior. These Vikings were actually the first to be called the greatest show on turf, but the Kurt Warner Rams will be the ones to go down in history with that nickname. Their offense is such a mirror image of Cunningham's in '98. A quarterback everyone thought was finished walks in from off the street, finds an unbelievable receiving core waiting for him, and engineers one of the greatest offensive performances ever seen. They sprint to a 49-17 win before Minnesota tacks on some garbage time points to make it look good. The Vikings simply have no answers for this, but to be fair, neither does anybody else. Congratulations to the St. Louis Rams, winners of Super Bowl 34. This is their first. And without them, the Vikings are suddenly starting to look very out of place. After removing all the franchises who have won at least one Super Bowl, we see that there are still many that haven't, but most are well below 500, having lost 30, 50, even 100 more games than they've won in the Super Bowl era. With the Rams gone, the Vikings' closest neighbors are now the Browns, who spent several years in stasis before their 1999 refounding, and who are about to spend the next 20 years or so completely falling off a cliff. And three very new franchises, the Jaguars, Panthers, and Ravens. The Vikings are so clearly a team that should have won one by now, and 1998 was so clearly their moment. But so, of course, was 1989. So were the 1970s. After their loss to the Falcons in '98, Carl Eller found a dejected Randy Moss in the locker room and put his hand on his shoulder. There was no, "you'll win it next year." Eller knew better than that. That was what everybody always told him. Instead, the future Hall of Famer simply told the other future Hall of Famer, "You had a great year." It's no consolation for Vikings fans, I'm sure, but they deserve to know how happy their team made the rest of us in 1998. We watched a retired superstar quarterback return and completely remake himself. We saw a rookie who we'd spent years reading and hearing bad things about, and who in one short year established himself as one of the most electrifying athletes to ever play the sport. We were all treated to the spectacle of a team that seemed like it had unlocked a new way to play football. It was some of the most exciting play any of us had ever seen. They were the subject of discussion every Monday morning in every high school homeroom in the country. Did you see what Randall Cunningham did? Did you see what Randy Moss did? We were watching them launch our sport into the future, and we knew it. That they didn't bring home a Lombardi trophy at the end of it doesn't particularly interest me. Plenty of far less memorable teams have done that. The 1998 Vikings did something far more special. They defied everything they were supposed to be, to put something genuinely special into the world that had not been there before.